Hey everybody, Mike Huseman here. Glad to have you on Off Season After Dark, episode 4. And today we continue to make our rounds of the G5 conferences. So last week, as you may recall, we talked about Mountain West Conference. Today we have Garrett Armbrust here, and we are moving east and talking about the American Athletics. So lots of movement in the AAC this year, lots of new coaches, lots of QBs. We will, same format we've had, in the other shows, but glad to move to the AAC and a conference that maybe you guys don't know as much about. Certainly doesn't seem to be as publicized, especially in SEC and Big Ten land. So, Garrett, thanks for being here. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Where you at, who you root for, what you cover.
Of course. So yeah, I'm I guess you could say college kind of sports fanatic, especially college football. It's definitely my main passion. So you can find me on Twitter, Fourth and Saturday, doing a lot of college football content over there. Season previews. I'm trying to do every team in the country. I've done about 60 so far, so about roughly 85 to go. With the 2 new teams in the FBS this year, and then I'm
just got the Gamecocks done too. My viewers will love to see that one.
Yeah, just finished them yesterday. So just trying to pump 1 or 2 of those out a day, doing some different lists, and doing an internship this summer at the radio station here in Knoxville, Fox Sports Knoxville, Fan Run Radio. So that's what you'll see behind me today, using their podcast studio today, and just excited to talk some ball today with Mike about the AAC.
Yeah. Awesome. So you those of you who usually see me on After Dark, who are Jeb fans, you may know that Jeb is our Tennessee guy, Garrett. So Garrett is a Vol himself. So glad to have you here. As we, both of us mentioned, we are talking about AAC today. So how we have kicked off all of these has been, we talked about the head coaches, who is new in the conference, who's a good head coach, who might be on the hot seat, all of that. One thing that we did differently today, though, is Garrett also made a list, as I did. So you will see our side-by-side lists here. Mine on the left and Garrett's on the right, where we ranked all 14 of the coaches in this conference. So you will see relatively similar at the top, and then near the bottom, we have some movement. So we do have a few new head coaches here. Zach Kitley is new at FAU. He was formerly the offensive coordinator at Texas Tech. Scott Abel is at Rice. He was at FCS Davidson. Trey Lamb at Tulsa was at ETSU for a year. He only 35 years old. He is on his 3rd D1 head coaching job, so that's pretty impressive. And then Blake Harrell is semi-new. He was interim for the second half of last year at ECU and is now the full-time guy. So, Garrett, who do you think's on the hot seat here? Anybody? Who do you think really has to win this year?
I think the name that sticks out to me the most is Trent Dilfer. Just with UAB, the past couple seasons there has been really rough. I think he's a guy that, if he doesn't win this season, I think he's going to be shown the door at the end of the year. If they start the season 2-4, 2-5, I wouldn't even be surprised if this is a really mid-season firing. I think everybody else on the list is pretty safe. Obviously, everybody at the top is a pretty proven coach. Yeah. All the guys through the middle either new, kind of have a longer leash, or they've proven what they can do. And then obviously even the guys at the bottom, newer coaches. So I see Dilfer as really the only guy that's on the hot seat in this conference this year.
No, I absolutely agree with that. I think you hit on a good point where even our guys who were relatively newer in their 2nd, 3rd year, guys like Newberry, Golish, Morris, we've seen a lot of promise and good things from these guys, even, after just a year or 2. And Dilfer, I think, is the one that stands out to me as the guy who has to be, the most, where he's 7-17, entering year 3, and that's not going to cut it there, especially, Bill Clark had done wonders there, in bringing the program back. At the top, I don't think anybody would, really disagree. Our top 5 are the same guys, though we have Keeler and Jeff Traylor, mixed up. I gave Keeler the edge largely because he's done it at multiple schools. There is no coach ever who's won more games at the FCS level. He is the only coach to win the FCS national title at 2 different schools, and he did pretty well in bringing Sam Houston up to the FBS level. He's a guy who's won a lot of games, and Traylor's fantastic. Like him a lot. He's 46-20 entering his 7th season, but that's kind of why I gave Keeler the slight edge over Traylor. So what made you give Traylor the edge over Keeler?
Yeah, no, I mean, this definitely could have gone either way. I mean, Casey Keeler, obviously an incredible coach at the FCS level, led Sam Houston State to a national championship, a few years ago, right before they moved up to FBS. They come up to FBS. They have a, rough first year as expected, as almost every team does in their first year of FBS. And then, last year, bowl victory, they win the New Orleans Bowl, beat a proven Sun Belt team in Georgia State. I don't know, something about Jeff Traylor, though. I actually spent time kind of in the press conference room with him last year at the Myrtle Beach Bowl when I went to go cover that game, and he was just a really good guy. I could see that his players, especially Owen McCallum, their quarterback, he really loves playing for them, and he just takes a lot of pride in the city of San Antonio. Obviously they don't have a professional football team in San Antonio. The Spurs are really their only professional sports team, so I think the city really backs into UTSA athletics a lot, and he really does a good job of showcasing their team. I think UTSA, it's a tougher place to win at than people think it is. And he's made it look really easy. And he's never had a losing season. He's one of the best coaches in high school history in Texas. That is, largely in part how he got this job working up the ladder. I don't know. This honestly was like a 50-50 tie. I just put Traylor there kind of biasly, I guess, toward seeing him in person this year, but no, I could see Casey Keeler being 2. It's kind of a 2A, 2B type of situation.
Yeah, totally get that. And then we at 4 and 5, we're the same with Monken and Albin, which was kind of a late switch for me. In making the whole list, the last decision I made was who's going to be 4 and 5. I initially had Albin just ahead of Monken, but then switched it to have Monken at 4. So out of all of my, the off-season hires, I always write about coaches for Mike Farrell Sports, and in my top 5 favorite hires of the off-season, Tim Albin was in there. I love him for Charlotte. He picked up at Ohio after Solich left and was very solid. And I think Charlotte is one of those gems at the G5 level where you're in a big city. You should be able to recruit well. Facilities are pretty good. And I think it's a place where you can win, but Biff just wasn't, doing great there. But in the end, after really getting deep into it, I decided to go Monken ahead of Albin. Monken's entering season 12 at Army and has won over 100 games and was really good last year. So it gave Monken the edge there. What do you think? Any insights into those two?
Yeah, no, again, this is kind of like a 4A, 4B type of situation. Like they're both, extremely good coaches. I think Albin winning 10 straight games at Ohio was extremely impressive, and I think he's going to be a great coach at Charlotte. I think Charlotte fans might have to wait a year. I don't know that they're going to be all the pieces are in place for them to be great this year. But I think down the line, 3-4 years down the line, this is a team, like you said, with the resources that they have in the biggest city in North Carolina. I think there's a chance that they could even be an AAC contender as we get down the line. But I think for me, it was just Monken being at a service academy where it's hard to win games. They're not able to access the transfer portal in the way that really any other school in the country is able to.
Certainly. Yeah, that's a good point.
The brotherhood of a service academy is obviously going to be stronger than any other locker room in the country. And I think that the way that the pieces fell together last year with Bryson Daly and the way that they won games last year, it just gave me a slight edge. I thought it was just really impressive what Army was able to accomplish last season.
No, it certainly was. They were top-notch last year. Bryson Daly had a fantastic season and can't really debate how well he's done. The next one that in looking at Ryan Silverfield, I almost felt like I was giving him the short end of the stick. You look at his record. He's 42-21 in 5 years. He's won 2/3 of his games. That's pretty good for only being 6th on the list. And a guy who is coming off of back-to-back double-digit win seasons, won 10-23, was 11-2 last year. For all he's won, I think this year will be a critical year for him. We've seen him with Seth Hennigan for a lot of football. They've had a lot of games together. Them with the new QB, it's probably going to be Brendan Lewis, though AJ Hill was a top-notch recruit for him, and we'll get to the QBs a little later. But we both have Silverfield at 6, even though if someone would tell me he should be top 5, I really wouldn't argue with them.
Sure. Yeah, no, I feel like it's a deserving spot to be, even though he has had an incredible record. It just, I don't know. It just seems like with the roster that they had last year, really the past 2 years, they were kind of like a dark horse G5 playoff contender for me. And obviously with what Boise State did last year, no one was touching them, but they just seem like they kind of lost a game every single year that they really shouldn't have lost. Last year, they lost to a UTSA team that was having one of their worst seasons under Jeff Traylor. They lost early in the season to Navy before everyone really knew how good Navy was, but they did it in kind of a ugly fashion. I think they gave up 49 points or somewhere around that number.
Both of their losses, they played no defense. So they allowed 44 and 56 in their 2 losses.
Yeah, and I don't know. That's just not – obviously a playoff contending team doesn't do that on defense. And I don't know. I think without Seth Heineken and Rock Taylor and names like that this year that have been there on that offense, it's just – it might be – I think they're still going to be obviously a contender in the conference. But I don't know. I just feel like they've kind of underperformed the past couple of years for the roster that they had. And if they have, a little bit of a less roster than they've had – I don't know that they're going to win 10 games this year like they have in previous seasons.
He also took over a very good situation. When Mike Norvell left, they were really good relative to the G5. I mean, they had on both sides of the line, they had talent. They were running the ball really well, and he took over a good spot. And his first couple of years, they weren't great. Like, they weren't terrible. He's never had a losing record, but they went 8 wins, and then they were 6-6, then 7-6 before the last 2 years, having a really good year.
Yeah, and I still think when I think of Memphis, I think of those Norvell teams. Like I think of that UCF Memphis AAC championship game that went down to the wire. That's one of the best conference championships games we've seen in the last decade. That's really the type of that's kind of when I think of Memphis, I still go back to those teams. As impressive as Seth Heineken was, those teams were special back then.
Yeah, it's funny. I remember that we had 2 years in a row of Memphis UCF in the conference title, and both games were shootouts that were 50s, 60s. I think one of them even went to like 62-55, something like that.
That's just exciting football, to watch. So
one coach here who I'm very high on long term is Eric Morris. I think he is going to be a guy who won't be long for the AAC, especially in a team who wants to, be air raid, throw the ball. He's a former Texas Tech, Washington State guy, was at Incarnate Word with Cam Ward before. I think we're going to see Eric Morris move up the ranks. Alex Golish probably will too. And he's a little bit lower on the list, but Morris is a guy that I like. At North Texas, after Seth Luttrell was there, they were not in good shape, and Morris, his record is slightly over 500 overall, slightly under 500 at UNT after 2 years. But I think he's a good coach.
Yeah, and I think UNT is one of those teams. It's like if they recruit well, they're a sleeping giant because the DFW area, they have so many high-level high school recruits, and if you can keep those guys in state at UNT, North Texas is obviously a team. Like you said, they have the air raid offense. They have 2 quarterbacks this year that are going to be competing for the job. You have the FCS quarterback, Reese Poffenhagen, that came from Albany and was supposed to go to Miami. Didn't really work out there when Cam Ward transferred, comes over there. And I guess he's kind of like the projected QB1 this year, although, their guy last year in the bowl game looked really impressive as well. So that's an impressive QB battle there, and they're going to score points. So if they can keep the defense up, but yeah, I agree.
He was one of the guys I was going to talk about later. So I'm a big Reese Poffenbarger fan. I was at Miami last year. We didn't see him, touch the field, but his size and the way he threw the ball at Albany, quick release, big body. I mean, he has the mechanics and skills, I think, in this offense to really be a guy. Like you said, we know they're going to throw the ball and score a lot of points. I expect him to win the job, but you never know.
Right.
And then another team we expect to score a lot of points with the transfer QB and a new head coach, Zach Kitley at FAU. That was another hire I liked a lot. Kitley has rapidly moved up the ranks again. He was at Texas Tech, last year. And is moving over to FAU now as the guy. So we'll see what they do. Again, they're another one where I don't know in year one how much better FAU gets, but I think over a couple of years with Kitley, FAU will be doing a lot better.
Yeah.
We'll see what happens. But Caden Veldkamp will be their QB. He was at WKU. And then Easton Messer also comes over at receiver from him. But yeah, I'm a big Kitley fan.
Yeah, no, I like that hire a lot too. I thought, what he did at Texas Tech, man, they're just pushing out offensive coordinators. They got him, then they bring in Mike Leftwich from Texas State this past year. But FAU, like you said, it might take him, a little bit of time. But I'm really high on that hire. That's another team like North Texas. They have their recruits in South Florida. They just got to go out and get them. And if they can get those guys, they seem like to me they could be a team that might they might upset a team in the top 3 or 4 of the AAC and end a team's chances to go to the conference championship game this year.
Yeah. They're also one, I think, with being first year, they could not show up on defense one game and allow 45 to a team they shouldn't and lose. So
right.
I don't know how consistent they'll be.
Speaking of consistency, a guy to talk about that would be Brian Newberry, who is increasingly getting better at Navy. Him and Alex Golish were kind of, we had them neck and neck here at 8 and 9, or 7 and 8 for you, 8 and 9 for me. But got what a year from Navy last year, and projected to be solid again with Horvath coming back. They weren't as good in year one than 10 wins last year from Navy, playing service academy football. Fundamental, tough in the trenches, not turning it over, good special teams. Newberry's doing a good job there.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that bowl win showed me a lot to go out and beat Oklahoma. Yep. I know Oklahoma, as all the Power 4 teams, they have opt-outs, but people don't talk about, the G5 schools, they have opt-outs too. Obviously, service academies, not as much. Their players aren't opting out, but still to go in and beat an SEC team in a bowl game like that, that's really impressive. It builds momentum for this year. They're coming off a great end of their season. They're going to be, in most, preseason polls you're seeing, they're a projected team to be in the conference title game this year, just with what they have coming back. I think Newberry's a fantastic coach. Like Monken, they have their hands tied behind their back in the transfer portal. They can't do that, service academy. So I just have a great respect for those two guys. And again, he's a coach that's just flying up the rankings if they keep winning.
Yeah, agreed. And that's an interesting one from a service academy, if he keeps winning, would he stay there or would he take a job at a different school, whether it be P4 or a G5, where it might be easier to win and your recruiting base would be bigger? That'll be something to monitor. We're seeing Ken Newman-Alalo do very good things at San Jose State. Talked about him last week. An interesting guy who I think people out here that don't know this team should look at this year is Scott Abel at Rice. And I know very few people outside of Houston are watching Rice football, but with Abel coming in, we are going to see a fun offense. They're going to be doing very unique things that nobody else does, mixing in a lot of option concepts with different things, and they're going to be very unique in a way that I think viewers should tune in on Saturdays or weekday games and watch the Rice Owls this year.
Yeah, I thought that was kind of an interesting hire, but looking
Yeah.
deeper into it, like you said, I think that could be it's a name that not a lot of people are going to know unless you really deeply follow the FCS.
Yeah.
But I think I think it was a good hire. I think Rice, they have the potential. Again, another team. A lot of teams in the AAC, they're in a city where they can succeed. They're in Houston.
Exactly.
They have a lot of East Texas guys that they can go out there and recruit. And it seems both teams in Houston, them and the University of Houston, have just really the past couple of years like not even been existent. And Rice a couple of years ago, I know they played Texas State in that bowl game, and that was kind of a high scoring, thrilling game. And they finished the season, I guess, 6-7 that year. But I think Rice is one of those teams that, like, the people that live there, like, they expect them to be good. And I think in a couple of years they're another team that could be an exciting team to watch.
Certainly. No, I'm definitely on board with you there. Trey Lamb is another new one. Mentioned him. He's at Tulsa. And he's kind of been the wonder kid ever since he started being a head coach and was at where I'm blanking. Gardner Webb, that was it, where he was at before East Tennessee. But has fastly moved up. Was at Gardner Webb for 4 years. It was just 1 year last year at East Tennessee in the FCS. But Tulsa's a team where you're the only show in town. There's no pro team, in the state, in football, and you're a ways away from Oklahoma City, which both OU and Oklahoma State are nearby. And Tulsa's very much tried to, have the identity of we're going to be the city's team, and they're doing all right with it. And I was a guy who, at the time, I had liked the Kevin Wilson hire a lot. He had done okay things at Indiana, was a good offensive coordinator, but he was just not a right fit at Tulsa. He wasn't winning games there. They won 4 games his first year, 3 last year. Now, I still might argue he didn't get enough time because he had a really young team and wasn't using the portal and getting older guys as much as some. It was really about getting his guys in the system, and he didn't get time to do that. But they still weren't winning. So Tulsa has moved on to Trey Lamb, who, like I said, is kind of the wonder kid.
Yeah, no, it seems like there's kind of a new vibe within their program this offseason. I know they landed, I think it was either high 3-star or 4-star prospect a couple months ago, and that was kind of like the home run that they needed to get the ball rolling here. And you got to have a coach that, like you said, adapts to Tulsa and wants Tulsa to succeed, because, like you said, you're not close to Oklahoma City. Oklahoma and Oklahoma State are obviously the 2 big schools of the state. If you can get the people on your side of the state to really buy into Tulsa football, it's a tough place to win at. I think they're the smallest school enrollment wise in FBS. They only have, I think, 2,500 students or something like that. So obviously there's, some toughness there with having students showing up to your game and, creating an electric environment in your stadium and whatnot. But again, it's a hire that we probably won't see the benefits of it this year, but looking down the line 2-3 years, it could be something to keep an eye on that we might like.
Definitely. And I think that is a reason why, talking about that down the road, but with Tulsa, Rice, FAU, etc., we're talking about newer coaches who are going to win by doing different things, and that can make for fun football to watch, because they've had the foresight to realize we're not going to be able to line up and do the same things as the big dogs. Service academies have done this for years. We got to have our niche and be good at it and get players that fit that. So you could see a lot of that, in this conference, and that'll make for fun football.
Yeah, no, it's definitely exciting because they get a lot of their games, on Thursday nights when people can watch them, and it really puts a spotlight on the teams, which is what I like about, a lot of these G5 conferences doing these weeknight games. I know the fans of the actual teams get a little bit aggravated that the games are played on weeknights and maybe they can't go to the game and stuff, but it really helps your brand because
absolutely,
truthfully, 90% of the country, unfortunately, and I'm not one of those people. I know you like and we love watching G5 football as much as we do Power 4, but unfortunately, if Georgia's playing Alabama on TV, 90% of the country plus is not going to be watching, an AAC game that's on linear television on ESPNU. So having these games on weeknights really gives you the time to showcase your school.
Yeah, I was having a back and forth a couple days ago about that same topic with the guy who was a Northern Illinois fan, because the question posed was, what team is not a fit in their current conference. And there's a lot of them now with realignment, but with NIU moving to the Mountain West next year, they're not a fit there. I mean, especially geographically, but also otherwise, they're not a fit. Like, they seem to be a good fit. And this guy said he was happy about the move because then there's no more Tuesday, Wednesday action. It's all Saturday games. And my point of view was kind of what you mentioned of nobody's going to watch your games on TV now. You're not going to compete on Saturday. And he said he was okay with that for two reasons, one of which I think is legit, one I would disagree with, but he said it does make it a lot tougher for fans of that school to go to the games when it's Tuesday, Wednesday. That's legit. You're not going to make, maybe a 3-4 hour or longer drive to go to a game on a Tuesday or Wednesday night. But he said that, viewpoint about the TV that I had mentioned doesn't hold up because they get pushed to ESPNU, ESPN Plus when ESPN starts showing, early season NBA games or stuff like that. But I still think you're going to get more people watching on midweek than you would on Saturday when you're competing with the Power Four conferences.
Yeah,
but I mean, it's just a preference. And CUSA's smart to do it as well.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, that's what the MAC's built their conference on. I mean, it's Tuesday night action. I mean, that's what people watch. Now, I will say, obviously, some of the games on Tuesday nights, there's not very many people in the stands. Like you said, you can't get off work. You have kids, that have nowhere. They can't come with you or whatever. Got to put them to bed early, stuff like that. So there's obviously stuff that, obviously, as a fan, I'm sure that I would want my games to be on Saturday if I was a fan. But being neutral watching those games, I like watching football 5-6 nights a week as much as I can during the college football season.
In my time at South Carolina, we never had a weekday game. It is more uncommon in the SEC. But here at Marshall, both of my first 2 years here working, we've had one Thursday game. Mm-hmm. And it was a lot of fun, like going to the third. 1 year it's been home, one it was away. I really enjoyed it because my thought was, well, I'll go to the Marshall game Thursday, but then Saturday I can watch other games on TV. I realize not everybody's going to do that. But we still got pretty good attendance, and the people here in Huntington are, Marshall wild. So it was fun.
Yeah, exactly. Thursdays are good for like the Sun Belt because at least you can take, some people can get Friday off of work. Absolutely. Or Friday's a little bit more, relaxed than a Wednesday. So
yeah, and the Friday night one, like ACC Big Ten do the Friday night ones, which is honestly that's probably the last night I would do a weekday game, but it works out for them.
Right.
We'll slightly change topics now to, another one of the regulars we've had the first couple of weeks. And this is the projected AAC standings. Got this from Athlon Sports. But, you'd mentioned most things project Navy to be in the conference title game. Athlon does this. This would put Tulane and Navy in the conference title game, as the AAC now is a conference that does not use divisions. But looking at this, is there any team that you think is a lot lower on this list than they should be? Let's start off with that. For me, I don't know how much higher they'll be, but I could see Temple finishing higher than 10th. I think because of the way Keeler is and the style of play, they're good on defense, very fundamental. I'm not saying Temple is going to be in the conference title game, not saying they're a contender to win, but I do think they're a contender to finish higher than 10th because of the injection Keeler will give them.
I agree. Yeah. Looking at ECU, I feel like they might finish more like top 5 in the conference just with Hauser coming back at QB. I feel like that's a team that could be good. Memphis, they're 6th. I struggle to put them that low until I see that they have a season that really drops off. And USF at 3. I know we were talking about teams that we would slide up higher. USF, I'm not sure that I would put them at 3rd. To me,
I wouldn't either. I need to see that Byron Brown's not going to make mistakes before I put them that high. I mean, they were a team 2 years ago in Golish's year 1, we were very promising. They had been terrible with Jeff Scott. They got an injection right away, finished 7-6. And then last year, they also finished 7-6 and didn't do much. So, I need to see more out of USF.
Yeah, and I mean, they've had their injuries with their QBs, last year. And Golish is obviously a great offensive mind, was a great offensive coordinator for us at Tennessee. We scored a lot of points that year, so I'm rooting for him to succeed. I just don't know if they're going to finish that high in the conference. They've kind of underperformed the past 2 years. Like you said, they've gone 7-6. Obviously, Brown is a very hyped-up QB, but we haven't really seen him play fully to his potential that we know that he can. If he does play to that potential, sure, they could. But I just don't know, especially the first week of the season. They opened with Boise State. I feel like that could be a game. Now, it is on a Thursday night at 5:30. It's kind of an odd time. I feel like that does set up for them. It's going to be about 250 degrees when they play that game. It's going to be super hot. So that definitely sets up for them. But if that's a game that they lose by 20 points, I feel like that's going to be kind of a deflating start to the season, even though that won't count toward conference play. But
also, we got with USF, their first 3 games of the year, they are Boise at home, then they go at Florida and at Miami. So if you lose to Boise, you're probably going 0-3.
Right, and
like you said, not that doesn't affect the conference standings at all. It doesn't mean anything for getting to the conference title game, but your morale is going to be really low, and you might lose a lot of that juice you have at that point and a lot of the motivation to keep going.
And when your offensive and defensive lines are going up against those Power 4 offensive and defensive lines, there's going to be a couple injuries. Like, you're not going to get through those 3 games completely healthy going into conference play. So,
especially like you said, when it's that hot, you're getting mauled the whole game, multiple weeks in a row.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
And UTSA will be another interesting one, I think, to start the year, because they're another team that's going to have 2 pretty tough games out of the gate. They got at Texas A&M and then Texas State at home. So 2 good battles for UTSA, and they are a team who you were praising Taylor before with McCown coming back, and Robert Henry at running back. UTSA is going to have a shot to go to the conference title game. I think they're listed as 4 here. They'll be in the mix the whole season, I think, whether they make it or not.
No, I 100% agree. I think they definitely have a better chance than South Florida, in my opinion, looking at this list right here. So
I agree. Yeah. And with Army, so much of what they do is going to depend on, Dwayne Coleman, who's succeeding daily. Daly was unbelievable last year. Most people don't realize this. He tied with Ashton Jeanty for the most rushing touchdowns in the country in 2024. Monken figures it out almost every year. I don't think Army has a massive drop-off. But last week in my show where we talked about Mountain West, we were talking about Air Force with Patrick, and he made the point of, if you look at the roster trends with all 3 service academies, they rarely have 2 massively good years in a row because you graduate most of your class and then it's tough to replace them. Maybe Army has one of those years again this year where they might drop off a touch.
Yeah, and it's going to be almost impossible to have, what Daly did last year. He was a top 10 rusher in college football as a quarterback, with all the running backs, and then he's right up there. He might have even been top 5. I'm not exactly sure where he was on the list for sure, but like you said, he was tied with Ashton Jeanty for the most touchdowns rushing. Like, you're not going to be able to have a quarterback that brings that production level back, and everyone knows that, obviously. So they're just going to have to try and go out there and, they're going to run the option, and they're going to wear you down, and they're probably going to do, 11, 12-minute drives where they just stuff it down your throat the entire game. And a lot of teams are not ready for that. And that's a lot of wear and tear on opposing teams' defenses. And that's why I think Army, even with the new quarterback and a new offense, I think they're still a dangerous team, just the way that they can wear down your defense.
Exactly. And they had the best defense in the conference last year. They only allowed 15 points a game. They do lose contributors on defense. Woody, their D coordinator, is back. And part of their offense being part of their defense being so stout is, like you mentioned, how they run it down your throat. certainly that complementary football helps your defense out a ton. But they're always good on defense. I don't expect their drop off on defense to be nearly as much, even with some of those position losses.
Yes.
And ECU's a team, yeah, you would mention them as potentially being higher with Hauser coming back. There'll be a lot of continuity there with, Harrell, in the full-time role as coach now. And then North Texas FAU teams, both, going to throw the ball around a lot, should put up a lot of points, and we'll see how they do there. But I would say with that grouping of North Texas, FAU, that's probably about where they'll finish. Do you agree with that? Disagree? Like, they're mid-conference teams at this point.
Yeah, I think North Texas, if their defense shows up, they could definitely kind of move into maybe that 4 or 5 range. If, it's a big if their defense shows up. But like you said, they're going to throw it around. They're going to score a lot of points.
Yeah.
I feel like they probably, of those 3 teams, have the highest ceiling. I don't know that they're necessarily the best team of those 3, but I think they have the highest ceiling of any of those teams, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, one thing I do agree with this projected standing is the bottom 3 teams here, UAB, Rice, Tulsa, they probably are the bottom 3 teams. I don't see many scenarios where any of those 3 wins too many games. Both Rice and Tulsa, new coaches, new systems, a lot of change there. And UAB, to be quite honest, I'm just not a massive fan of them. Jalen Kitna, will be at QB. He's coming back, which is something promising for them. But on defense, they were very bad last year. I think they were allowing almost 40 points a game, just under. But those 3, tough to argue having any of the 3 of them higher than they are.
Yeah, I think even the bottom 4, 11 through 14, I think those are pretty properly placed. As much as I want Charlotte to be good this year, I think it's going to take Alvin a couple of years to get them moving in the right direction. But I think overall this list is pretty fair. I mean, I think South Florida is really the only thing that I would say I'd move them down a couple slots. But other than that, I think you could convince me pretty much otherwise. Everything else is if you had a reason to back it up, I think I could understand the reasoning for any other team.
I'm with you there. Yeah. I want to ask you one question before we move into quarterback. So we had my first episode here a few weeks back, and now, as we've moved on, a decent amount of my viewers, people I interact with on Twitter are college fantasy football fans. And want to ask you, who would be a sleeper college fantasy guy that they should look for in this conference? If you could think of one guy, non-quarterback, who's a name out there that might be flying under the radar? And if you have a couple names, throw them out there that our people might like.
Yeah, UTSA, they got a wide receiver this year, and I need to look up his name. I forget his name. He's an FCS transfer from Houston Christian, and he averages like 28 yards per catch. So I think that could be an interesting dynamic. Let me see if I can find him right here. But yeah, he averaged like 28 yards per catch last year.
While you're looking that one up, one name I'll throw that maybe people should look at would be Don Chaney, now with Charlotte. Mm-hmm. He was a running back at Louisville and is at Charlotte now. And we know Tim Albin is going to try to run the ball a lot. So they're going to try to establish the trenches. Chaney's a guy who could get a lot of touches, I think.
Yeah, A.J. Wilson was the name that I was looking for UTSA. So, yeah, he averaged 26 yards per catch last year. So, McGowan throwing him the ball, I think that could be – and they're another team, they're going to throw the ball. So, I think that could be a really interesting piece right there.
That's a good point. Yeah, they are a team who has – been throwing the ball a lot. At Houston Christian, they're one of those. I paid attention to the Southland a little bit, did my master's, and was a GA at Northwestern State in the conference. But Houston Christian's head coach is a guy who was a successful Texas high school head coach who has kept things going there. He was quarterback coach and OC for a season or two. And then last year was his first year as head coach, but they've been throwing the ball around a ton there, in recent years.
Yeah, those
So,
Texas FCS schools, man, they love to throw it around them. Incarnate Word. I mean, some of those teams in Texas, they just throw the ball around and score a lot of points.
And before going to Incarnate Word, Zach Kitley was a Houston Christian O coordinator. So that's the kind of schools we're talking about. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. No, yeah. I mean, that's.
Or it might have been, he might have went to Western Kentucky from there and then went back to Incarnate Word.
Okay.
But yeah, Kitley was there for, a time. We'll move now into QBs, though. This QB list is not in any schematic or specific order. These are just the projected 14 starters thrown out there. We do have a couple battles, in different spots. Charlotte being one. Connor Harrell, the North Carolina transfer, is projected to be the starter there. But Grayson Loftus, who is at Duke, is also a guy at Charlotte who is battling for the job there. We talked about North Texas is, also having a QB battle. Drew Mestmaker is the one who Garrett had mentioned before. Caden Samanza was very good at Ball State. Or was pretty good. He had his moments, but I don't know that he has the Tulane job locked up. I know Donovan Leary, a Illinois transfer, and Brendan Sullivan, an Iowa transfer, are also on the roster at Tulane, so we'll see what happens there. But what QBs do you like to look for in this conference, Garrett?
I think Veldkamp immediately is, for me, a top 3-4 quarterback. He honestly could probably be, by the end of the season, I could see him being the top quarterback. Comes in from Western Kentucky. Very, very good quarterback there. Obviously, it's going to fit right into his hands. They're going to let him throw the ball a lot this year. I could see him being a top 2 quarterback by the end of the season. Obviously, Horvath, an accomplished QB from last year. We know he's going to be good. Owen McCowan, obviously been there a couple of years. We expect him to be good. I can see Caden Hauser in year 2 at ECU being really good. Obviously, the Michigan State transfer. He seems like he could be poised for a real big breakout year. And then I think Poffenbarger at North Texas coming from Albany. Those would be kind of my top 5 guys in the conference.
It's a weird conference QB-wise, both real life practically and college fantasy-wise. Because if you look at fantasy football here, there's so many QBs that with the right situation could be number one. You have Coleman and Horvath because they're going to be running the ball nonstop and getting touchdowns. Byron Brown was one of the top picks last year in fantasy drafts preseason, then flopped. Poffenbarger is going to throw the ball a ton. Veldkamp's going to throw the ball a ton. Hauser is going to be super consistent, we think. McCown is another guy who should be pretty solid. There's multiple QBs who could potentially be very good players this year. I think Samanza is an interesting one, practically because Tulane's a team we expect to contend for the conference title, and they'll need at least serviceable play from him to do that. Anybody's going to need that, in a QB. So I'm excited to see how Samanza does at Tulane in, the Summerall offense, which I think should be a pretty good fit for him.
Yeah, and he was pretty good at Ball State. He was. And you know that when you have a quarterback room that deep, you're going to get good QB play this year, because if a quarterback's not performing, he's going to be benched and it's going to be the next guy up. So that's that quarterback room is 1 through 3. That's the best quarterback room in the conference. I could see Brendan Sullivan honestly possibly taking that job, though. I mean, you saw how mobile he was in the Music City Bowl against Missouri, and he looked really, really good. But I don't know. Maybe he might not be QB1 week 1, but I think he's a guy that if someone doesn't step up to play, he's a really good QB2 that could come in there. But I think Samanza is a really good quarterback as well. I just don't know if I'd have him top 5 or top 3, but I think he could be really good.
I was a little surprised after spring ball that all 3 of those guys stayed at Tulane. I expected, probably Leary or Sullivan to end up transferring again, but all three of them are still there. What can you tell people about Drew DeValier at Rice? And I ask that because out of all 130 plus starting FBS QBs, there is probably none that I know less about than Drew DeValier at Rice. He's just a guy who I can't say I've heard much about. So what should we look for in him?
Yeah, no, honestly, I'm kind of right there with you. I'm not
Okay,
100% sure on him. I watched Rice last year, a little bit, but he's not. I've heard of him, and I know maybe a tiny bit about him, but I'm right there with you. I'm not extremely
redshirt freshman. We haven't seen him play a ton, so if Drew or any of his family members are watching, I apologize for not being too knowledgeable about his game. So
yeah,
and Kirk Francis at Tulsa, we do certainly know with them that they're another team who's going to be throwing the ball around a lot and should at least be fun to watch, especially with the injection of, Lamb as head coach there. I expect that Francis will be all right. We did see him play a decent amount last year. He threw for 1,500 yards in 2024 for Tulsa and played a little bit the year before as well in a more limited role. But that he'll be an interesting one to watch at Tulsa too, to round out this list.
Yeah, he seemed like he had some pretty solid moments last year for them. So I could see him being a pretty, mid-level player in the conference. I think Connor Harrell's another interesting name. I feel like he could be a good quarterback.
Yeah, I think so. That with Tulsa, with Charlotte, we know that him and Loftus are battling for the job. I agree with you, though. I think Harrell will eventually be the guy. I'd be surprised if he doesn't win that job.
Yeah.
So we'll move on a little bit now to still with QBs, but this is the ranking side by side for Football Nation and then Home Team of their top 12 G5 quarterbacks. So this is all the G5 conferences, not just AAC, but we see definitely some AAC influences here. And the one on the left, we see Veldkamp and Horvath at 2 and 3, Brown at 4, McCown at 6, Hauser at 11. So lots of AAC guys on that one. And then in the one on the right, we have Simonza at 3, who's not even on the list in the other one. Lewis from Memphis at 6, the transfer from Nevada. I don't know if I'd mentioned that before. Brown, McCown. So lots of AAC guys on this list. And I don't hate the list. The one thing I would not have Maddox Madsen this high at Boise. I mean, there's nobody in America last year, QB-wise, who had a better luxury than him of just handing it off to Ashton Jeanty the whole time. And this is what we're going to do. We're going to ride this the whole way. So I would not that Madsen did what he was supposed to do. He didn't turn the ball over. To me, that doesn't warrant him being 1 or even 4 on this list.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, he had a lot of pieces around him that as long as he was just he just had to be the guy that didn't make mistakes and make turnovers, and he had the pieces around him. And that's sometimes what a good quarterback just has to do. But yeah, like you said, I mean, it's not like he was out there making a lot of flashy plays. And obviously he won't have Jeanty this year, but man, he's got Sire Gaines in his backfield this year.
Yeah.
Sire Gaines is going to be, I mean, you listen to what people are talking about him, and he's going to be a potential top, first-round draft pick when his time comes in a couple of years. Obviously was injured pretty much all of last season, but he looked really good in the Georgia Southern game in the first game of the year.
Yeah.
Got a couple handoffs in Oregon before he got hurt, but he's going to be a beast in that backfield this year.
Yeah. And then they also have Malik Sherrod, the transfer from Fresno, who will be a decent two-back. And, I don't think we certainly won't see the usage out of Gaines that we did out of Jeanty last year. They'll definitely be handing it off to both guys quite a bit. But Gaines was a good mention too, especially for our college fantasy players here. One guy I'm fascinated to see who's on the right side of this list is Daquan Finn. He had been lights out at Toledo. I believe he was MAC Player of the Year a couple of years ago. Transferred to Baylor, where surprisingly to me, he didn't do much. Was not very successful there. Now he's coming back to the MAC and at Miami with Coach Chuck Martin, where they're always solid. They're going to win a lot of games, going to play good football in the trenches and run the ball well, which will play to his strength quite well, I think.
Yeah, that was a name that really stuck out to me. Like you said, he was really, really good at Toledo 2 years ago, comes back to the MAC. I think he's definitely the best quarterback in the MAC this year. I don't think there's really any arguing of that. I mean, I can see the argument for Parker Navarro, but I think when you see Daquan Finn's potential is just off the charts.
I know some people love Tucker Gleason too, but I would have both of those two ahead of Gleason. I don't think for me he's third at best.
Well, yeah, Finn, he's just so athletic, and he's very, I remember him being very mobile, and he's just one of those guys that's just an athlete, and that's really what you want as a quarterback. Looking at this list on the right, or go ahead. Sorry,
I would say as a Marshall guy for me, obviously got a front row seat to Braylon Braxton last year. He, the man started at Tulsa, was at Marshall last year and helped. Didn't start right away. He was, started off as the backup, and there was, kind of a two-headed race at QB last year. He eventually won the job though, and was a big reason why Marshall won the conference title last year. He has since Stone Earl was the guy who did start last year before him, but Braxton has followed Charles Huff down to Southern Miss, and in my opinion, both of them were massive losses for us, even if a lot of the other Marshall faithful don't want to admit it.
Yeah, 100%. I know you said you had the Mountain West. Y'all talked about that last week.
Yeah.
I was just wondering, what do you think about BFN being down at 11? Braden Fowler, Nicolosi.
Yeah.
I guess that's the other list. Doesn't have him. Do you think he's a top 12 quarterback in Group of 5 football? Would you put him in your top 12, or where do you think he kind of fits in?
I probably would. From if we're talking about ceiling, no, I don't think he is. But if we're talking about where we expect him to be at and consistency, yes. He's played a lot of football, and he has been pretty consistent the whole time. He's typically not great, but he's not that bad either. And at the G5 now, that continuity in the transfer portal era can be massive. So I have no problem, with him being at 11. So what were you going to say about him? Anything?
I think he's a good quarterback. I mean, what we saw 2 years ago, there were some rumors. I think it was K-State, tried to poach him away, and they were going to give him a pretty good NIL budget to come over there and play before Avery Johnson was their guy. So obviously they saw something in him. I think Colorado State's going to be a pretty solid team this year. I thought Calandra at 2 is a little bit interesting. I mean, he's kind of in a battle with Alex Orji for the starting quarterback job at UNLV. Obviously, we've seen what he's done is, he can be a good quarterback. I think the second best Group of 5 quarterback, though, is a little aggressive on that list there.
Speaking of UNLV, a guy I would have top 12, maybe even significantly higher, is Matt Sluka, who was at UNLV last year, became persona non grata with the NIL transfer saga. He is now transferring to JMU, where he's reuniting with Bob Chesney, who was his head coach at Holy Cross before. Sluka's a guy who's going to throw the ball well, and he's going to run for a lot of touchdowns near the goal line. So I like Sluka a lot and would have him on this list.
Yeah, that's an interesting name because obviously Alonzo Barnett got injured at the end of last year, and we don't know exactly when he's going to come back. If I don't think he's going to be ready to play week 1. If he was ready to play week 1, they probably
I was reading about it a lot yesterday. A lot of their people do not think he'll be ready right away.
Okay. So they'll probably obviously, like you said, he'll be the starting quarterback, and then Barnett will be the starting. Maybe he comes in, or maybe he doesn't come in. So I like that. I like that selection as well too. JMU is another team. They're always going to have a pretty good offense. I did my review on them the other day. They picked up some good pieces out of the portal, and Like you said, Sluka was very good at Holy Cross at the FCS level. And, he was pretty good at UNLV last year before that NIL dispute. Obviously he hadn't played football in a little bit because he didn't play the back half of that season. But, if he's the starting quarterback, I think he's in good hands.
Yeah, and I think that continuity with knowing Chesney's offense inside note will be massive for him. I won't show this slide too long, but you asked about the Mountain West QBs. This is the list we got from one of the Nevada guys that put it out there. E.J. Warner is another guy who I would consider having E.J. Warner as a top 12 overall G5 QB. He has it number-wise, put it all together, but I think he's a pretty good player.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's I feel like that's fair. What is listed here?
Alajado's a good QB. I didn't mention Alejado. He's consistently, we see him, decently high on a lot of these lists, and he's a guy that's going to put up numbers. With Timmy Chang, they will be throwing the ball a lot. We know that.
Yeah, I think Bryson Barnes is a really interesting one too. Goes over to Mendenhall now at Utah State.
Yeah.
Obviously, it didn't work out for him at Utah very well, but comes back to G5. Maybe he has kind of a renaissance in his play and lifts them up, because I think Utah State's a team in the Mountain West that no one expects them obviously to be a contender, but I think they could win a decent amount of games with the coaching change this year.
So the guy I had last week is a Utah State reporter. That's who he follows and has his show on, and he kind of said, similar to you, maybe a little more nonchalant, but for them they don't know what to expect. He said in year one, and I did my Mountain West head coach rankings the week before that, as I did with the AAC for this one, but I had Mendenhall as number one, but we don't know anything about that team. There's so much, turnover there, coaching wise, player wise. It's kind of a grab bag of what's going to happen. They're probably a team that's, 2-3 years away from the product we expect to see.
Yeah, no, exactly. But I mean, with Mendenhall, you're going to be in good hands. He's won pretty much everywhere he's been. So, that's an interesting team to watch in the Mountain West.
One other, topic we've talked about in the other episodes, both AAC and then larger we'll expand into, but in terms of the college football playoff this year, do you see any AAC teams as having a shot at the playoffs? I think Tulane is one who, if things go right, Tulane could get in there. They're probably the only one, but what do you think AAC playoff-wise?
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think Tulane's really the only real shot. I think if Navy, plays hard-nosed football and plays to their highest level of potential that they could possibly play to, maybe they could. But they're just kind of at a disadvantage because they play Army-Navy game after the season, basically. Yeah. So you have those, and it's I don't know how that plays into if they lose that game, but they win the conference. How does that?
So that's a fascinating topic I've talked about before. The conference championship is on Saturday. The next day, we announce the field of 12 for the playoff.
Mm-hmm.
The next Saturday after that is the Army-Navy game. So those teams would have only played 12 when everybody else would have played 13 for a conference champion. So there could be a scenario where an Army or Navy makes the playoff, then loses the next Saturday in a game which is meaningless. The Army-Navy people would stone me for saying it's a meaningless game. Right. I mean it in the context of the playoffs. It is meaningless. Correct. If I'm making the playoffs, I'm resting anybody that's quasi-injured in that Saturday game.
Sure.
In preface for the playoffs.
Yeah, I didn't know if the selection show was on that weekend or if it was the weekend prior, which it is. So
I would almost say you should move it to the next Sunday, but the other teams especially the P4 teams, they wouldn't want that. They would want to know right away. So because they have to make their bowl plans if you're not in the playoff. So
right. No, I like that Army-Navy game late in the season, but I could see if they have a situation like this that ever happens, I think that game gets moved to week 0, the next season, because they're not going to let that happen again.
I don't know if it was you or somebody else, but someone brought that up on Twitter a couple days ago. And I said, with this new dynamic of the playoffs and especially them being in the same conference where you could potentially have that game 2 weeks in a row. That's not good. And having it week 0 would be better, I think.
Yeah, no, I think it's just the reason why people don't want to move it. I saw that tweet too. I think, and people in the comments were saying it's really just the tradition of the Army-Navy games always been, that weekend. And I don't know, there's just something about it.
Yeah, which tradition, okay, but for 80 years we had Big Ten and Pac-10 champs playing the Rose Bowl. We moved on from that. Sometimes moving on from traditions can be good.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think I'd give them the benefit of the doubt to keep playing in that week since they're Army and Navy. I'll let them do what they want. But I think the second that happens where they do have a quote-unquote meaningless game for playoff implications, I think you have to move it because I just don't think that's good for anybody.
Agree. It's not a problem until it's a problem.
Yeah,
I guess is the way I look at it right now.
Sure, right.
But other than Tulane, do you think there's any other Tulane Navy? Probably nobody else is UTSA is not going to be a playoff team. I don't think it would be tough for anybody else.
Yeah, I think Tulane's really the only team that's deep enough to do it. Because through a season you're going to have injuries and whatnot. And their coach is obviously so good.
And the tough thing with Tulane too is from a G5 perspective, you can maybe only maybe a second loss in the regular season and make it. Tulane has 3 P4 games in their non-con. They open up with Northwestern, which they got a legit shot. It's in New Orleans, and Northwestern we expect to be down. But then they have South Alabama on the road. Okay, G5 team, they'll be all right. But then we got back-to-back P4 games. Tulane has Duke and at Ole Miss back-to-back. You're almost certainly not going to win both of those games.
Right.
Maybe you beat Duke, but if you beat Duke and Northwestern, that's really good if you're Tulane because they're both P4s.
Yeah, that Duke game's going to be odd. You have Mensa, going back playing against his old team. Northwestern obviously has Preston Stone this year, so obviously they have QB play. I don't think any of those games that you mentioned, even South Alabama, they're a solid Sun Belt team. None of those games are free wins by any means. If you don't play well, you could lose 3 or 4 of those games. And if they
South Alabama, we're going to see
Zach.
Yeah, we're going to see Georgia Tech transfer Zach Pyron at South Alabama as their QB after. Pyron was at Minnesota in the spring, but then transferred again to South Alabama. So, but with Tulane and the topic someone else brought up with the Tulane going to Ole Miss, is that kind of like Boise at Oregon last year, where the measuring stick isn't necessarily if Tulane wins, but is it if Tulane keeps that game competitive? Does that people will know, okay, they're pretty solid. They're a team that could belong in the playoffs. It's an interesting question.
Yeah, well, especially in Tulane, I guess it was last time they played Ole Miss when it was in New Orleans. That was a really tight game, the entirety of the game, very close. So, I mean, I expect that game, especially with Austin Simmons at Ole Miss, it's going to be one of his first games, before they get into SEC play. So there might be some road bumps for them. And if Tulane's firing and ready to go as a proven team, it could be an interesting game to watch.
Yeah, I agree with you there that they're going to be a good team. Other than that, any other G5 playoff teams you think, Boise's, a lot of people are picking Boise to be that team again. They might be. I need to see them win without Gene T. I've said that multiple times on this show before, but they're going to be in the running. Heck, UNLV is another team. Dan Mullen taking over. Maybe UNLV can one up. For last year, they were on the doorstep, going into that conference title week. I don't expect any MAC team or Sun Belt team this year to really be a playoff contender. I think they'll beat each other up a lot in those conferences.
Yeah, I don't know. I get on the Texas State hype bus every year, so I don't know. Maybe they'll.
I was last year, and then not that they were bad last year, but relative to what we expected, they did have a bit of a letdown.
Yeah, I agree. I think them and JMU are probably the 2 top teams in the conference. But
I'm with you there. Yeah.
Like you said, I don't know that either of those teams are playoff contenders. An interesting one that I don't know if their team is necessarily what you would consider a playoff team, but looking at the schedule and what they're projected to be this year, San Jose State is supposed to be pretty solid this year, and they have one of the easiest schedules I've honestly ever seen at the power
Another
FBS
team
level.
in that vein, yeah, you're spot on with that. That's a great column. Another team in that vein who I made that observation about MWC as well, Colorado State. They return a lot, and that schedule's pretty weak. Colorado State could be a team that wins a lot of games, whether they're genuine or not.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think San Jose State would have to go 11-1. Their only loss would be to Texas. They would have to beat Stanford, and then they would have to probably go obviously undefeated in Mountain West play. I don't think 10-2 is getting them in, but I mean, it is possible. They avoid Boise State, they avoid UNLV, and they avoid Colorado State. So they don't really play any of the top teams.
And Texas State, like you had mentioned, they're another team. We're expecting they probably lose at Arizona State, but they might have to win their other, what would be, 12 games counting the conference title game. I don't know how much, just with the G5, any G5 team, there's not much wiggle room in losses,
right,
to be able to be that playoff team.
Yeah, well, someone's got to do it. So
absolutely,
they get the automatic bid now. So I guess if everyone has losses.
I think you made JMU, though. I think will definitely be the favorite in our, Marshall's division, and Texas State, Louisiana, who won the division last year in the West. They return a lot. Walker Howard will be the QB transferred in from Ole Miss, but they return quite a bit elsewhere. Louisiana will be no slouch. In the MAC, I think it's going to be our usual three-headed monster of Miami, Toledo, and Ohio, but I don't know if any of them are playoff caliber.
Yeah, sorry to cut you off. I was just gonna say I think Buffalo will be good too. I don't know.
Yes, agreed. Pete Lembo's a very good coach. Lembo was at South Carolina when I was he was special teams coordinator there. But in year one with him, they had a massive jump.
Yeah, I mean they obviously won't be a playoff contender either, but I think they could be a team that if they have a really good season, they could make the MAC championship game if they play to their highest potential.
Yeah, and they have Taquan Roberson will be at QB. We have seen him at many schools, Penn State, Kansas State, UConn, I think was in there. He's been around, but he will be Buffalo's QB, and will fit that offense pretty well that Ogbonna did last year, similar QB. In CUSA, that's another tough one playoff-wise because we talked about, not much wiggle room in, the G5 teams. With CUSA, there might be no wiggle room. You might have to go undefeated if you're a CUSA team because of how weak that your schedule metrics are going to be. Like they're so far below everybody else in just what the computer's going to spit out. So Liberty was, they were decent last year, but even for them, it was a little bit of a letdown. We, going into the year, some people thought Liberty could be that potential G5 playoff team. And they lost 3 regular season games, and then in the bowl game they lost because they had the App State game last year got canceled because of the hurricane, so they played one less game.
Right. Yeah, I think Liberty and Western Kentucky are really the only 2 teams that if everything went right, they'd be like last team in if they somehow went undefeated. But
and WKU is with Helton, they're always going to be consistent. But I don't know if they're ever going to be good enough on defense like that. And again, they lost their D coordinator this year to Colorado State. The Summers, their DC last year, went to CSU. But with WKU and that, looking at their non-con. So we actually have some interesting non-con games. WKU goes to Toledo.
Right, and that's at the Glass Bowl this year, or that's at Toledo this year. Yeah,
and And even though it is a conference game, an almost quasi-eliminator in week 0, Western Kentucky plays Sam Houston. So that might eliminate one of them right off the bat.
Yeah, exactly.
2 teams we expected to be better. And then I'll give WKU some benefit in looking at their schedule. I had said a CUSA team might have to be undefeated. WKU can lose to LSU on the road and still make it if they win the rest of their games.
Forget that. They play that as their when the SEC does Cupcake Week where they play
it's the weekend before Thanksgiving week, the second to last game.
Yeah, that's going to be a game they're going to lose. So you'd have to win every other game, and every other conference would probably have to have a 2-loss conference champion.
An interesting schedule quirk too this year: Liberty and WKU do not play in the regular season. So we may not good chance we see you play in the conference title game, but they don't play in the regular season this year, which is good for that conference because they could both have no conference losses and meet up with each other. And
Right.
that's really good for the comp. Yeah.
Yeah, they wouldn't eliminate each other in the regular season, so that's good. Yeah.
Any other one thing we've ended on all the shows, Garrett, going into this year, is there one hot or unpopular take that you hold going into this year that you'll beat your chest about, that maybe nobody's onto, nobody likes, etc., or just unheard of, that a take you like going into this year that you want to tell everybody about?
Hot take that I like this year.
It's an interesting one. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to think.
I've had a few different ones. When we did the Big Ten, my Big Ten take was there will not be any new Big Ten teams in the playoff this year. I think Ohio State, Penn State, Oregon probably make it, but I don't see a new team that didn't make it out of the Big Ten last year go to the playoffs.
All right, well, I'll go with mine. Okay. It's a pretty wild one, but I'll say Eric Rivers wins the Blittenkoff Award this year. I think he's the best wide receiver in the country. Everybody's going to pick Jeremiah Smith and Ryan Williams. Haynes King's going to be throwing in the ball. He was really good at FIU last year. I think he's going to be really good at Georgia Tech. I'm super high on him. I tweeted about that last night, so I'm going to ride with that for the rest of the year.
Yeah. And with Singleton, going to Auburn, there definitely will be targets there. And Rivers, a Memphis guy before FIU. So there's the AAC connection. But Eric Rivers going off. You heard it here from Garrett. You can find him Fourth and Saturday, right? That's your Twitter handle.
That's right.
And I'll tag. You'll see that that handle in all of my retweets if you're finding us on Twitter. If you're seeing us on YouTube, his name will be embedded in there. But thank you for being here, everybody, for our AAC episode talking about the American Conference. Next week, you will find me. We will talk about the ACC. So we will hit our second P4 conference next week. Garrett, thank you for being here. It was fantastic to have you.
Of course, we'll have to hop back on and do some stuff once we get into the football season.
Absolutely.